Hello and welcome to Summerhill Online Academy's Module 3 of the IELTS Academic Writing Preparation course. My name is Maciej Blaszyk, and in this first part of Module 3, we're going to be focusing on a general approach for IELTS Academic Writing Task 2. So in this session, it's very going to be similar to our first session for when talking about the general approach for IELTS Writing Task 1. However, unlike the first approach for IELTS Writing Task 1, where we looked at a kind of a general structural approach for answering all of the questions in just one format, we're actually going to have to take a look at 3 different formats for answering every kind of question for academic IELTS Writing Task 2. But generally speaking, the approach we're going to be working for is going to be the Thesis Statement Method, or this Thesis Statement approach for dealing with standardized language proficiency examinations like IELTS, specifically for answering the Part 2, which is the essay. So for IELTS Writing Task 2, it is an essay, and it's basically the same as academic and general. Academic Writing Task 2 and General Writing Task 2 are basically the same tests structurally, except that the general questions are a little bit more general, which means that the questions themselves deal with topics that are more closely related with everyday life and business, while the academic questions are a little bit more academic in terms of the topics, so they deal more with science and society in a more academic, theoretical sense. That being said, the actual strategies that we're going to use here can be equally applied for both the academic and general IELTS Writing Task 2. And the key will be to answer every part of the question. So there are, it is very easy for us when we're looking at some of those IELTS questions for writing task 2 to miss an important component. This is very important to answer every part of the question, but also it's going to be very essential for us to present a balanced response to those questions. So specifically, why we want to create a balanced response has to deal with what IELTS writing expects you to do for writing task 2, and we can see that in the task response aspect, or the task response section of the public version of the writing band descriptor. So specifically, when we take a look at writing task 2 task response, looking about what they're looking for band 5, 6, and 7. For band 5 of the task response section of the band descriptors, it says, the candidate addresses the task only partially. What this actually means is many of the questions asked you to balance advantages and disadvantages, or to discuss causes and effects. So if candidate only talks about advantages of a particular issue, or only talks about causes and ignores the effects, or ignores the disadvantages, let's just say, they would only be answering half of the question, or only part of the question, which would result in a band 5 in task response. For band 6, it says that the candidate addresses all parts of the task, although some parts may be more fully covered than others. Well, if a candidate talks more about advantages and less about disadvantages, or more about disadvantages and more about advantages, talks about many causes but only one effect of a particular issue, they're not presenting a balanced response. They're talking more about one side of the topic more than the other. That's when you get a band 6. So for a minimum of band 7, it asks us to address all parts of the task equally. This means we need to present a balanced response. And it really depends on the type of question that you have to do. So We're going to go ahead and take a look at a general response and how to deal with these kinds of questions. So first of all, let's take a look at a very general looking question for IELTS Writing Task 2. And the question asks us, grades encourage students to study more. So there's a statement, grades encourage students to study more. And then there's the question aspect, to what extent do you agree or disagree? Now, for this kind of question, and this is actually a rare question in the Academic Writing Task 2 section, there's an or. And this or gives us an ability to make a decision, to choose whether we 100% agree that grades encourage students to study more, or we completely disagree and say that no, we completely disagree with the statement that grades encourage students to study more. So in that section, we can choose to choose one side or the other, right? And here's the point. There is really no time for us to do any brainstorming or creating an outline or taking any notes. Currently, most IELTS Writing Task 2 is now taken on through computer-based, so you will have access to paper and pencils to make notes, but there really isn't a lot of time. As we mentioned before, candidates have 60 minutes to answer Writing Task 1 and Writing Task 2, and from my experience, candidates approach Writing Task 1 and complete it usually between 20 and 25 minutes. So it takes a little bit more time. So in reality, you only have 35 minutes to read the question, understand the question, and be able to write a response. And again, it's very highly recommended for us to take some time to read over what we wrote and correct any grammar mistakes, as we all make mistakes, typos with punctuation or even spelling when we write our responses. So we don't have a lot of time. So technically, we can only count for 30 minutes for us to write. So we don't have a lot of time. But a thesis statement method helps us to avoid, not only to get off topic, but to plan our answer as well. So generally speaking, we don't have time to write an outline for our essay or do a lot of brainstorming for our essay. We need to take an approach to very quickly answer the question and respond to the question. And this is why a thesis statement really helps us, right? And so the thesis statement approach takes very little time. And basically, a thesis statement is your introduction to your essay. And again, just like in Writing Task 1, where we are training ourselves to write right away and not stare at the question and think about the question, we don't want to be sitting there and thinking about the question for 5 or 6 or 10 minutes. We want to begin to write right away. And the thesis statement or the introduction of a Writing Task 2 can serve as the plan and an outline. And basically, a thesis statement will answer every part of the question, satisfying for that band 6 minimum. It will answer every part of the question right away. And a thesis statement also provides a clear position. Again, it's your opinion, it's your position about what you think, how you feel about the topic, whether you 100% agree or you disagree, or even if you have a neutral approach. But more importantly, a thesis statement is like a map that predicts the structure of your essay. So with a good thesis statement, if you have a good thesis statement, you can use that thesis statement, which is basically the introduction of your Writing Task 2, to plan your overall response and serve as a roadmap for how you're going to organize the rest of your essay. So here's an example of a thesis statement for our question. I believe grades certainly motivate students to learn because they make learning more meaningful, provide useful feedback, and allow their efforts to be recognized by others. So, first of all, we have a controlling idea in this thesis statement. I believe grades certainly motivate students to learn. Right? So this is our controlling idea. We're giving our position about the topic. In this case, I 100% agree that grades certainly motivate students. But our thesis statement also includes predictors. And these predictors, such as making learning more meaningful, providing use of feedback, and allowing efforts to be recognized by others, this is a predictor which in fact predicts the structure of our essay. In essence, the introduction of our writing task 2 is in fact a thesis statement. The introduction is just one sentence long. Many candidates begin writing task 2 by giving a background information or giving a general opinion or even trying to start with a hook the way they learn in colleges or high school or in other institutions that teach academic writing. So they have a very long introduction. But this is not the point. For our introduction for writing task 2, we are going to compress this introduction into just 1 or 2 sentences, which are a thesis statement. They're just a thesis statement. And of course, we are going to include predictors in this thesis statement. And those predictors will then predict the structure of our essay. And in the case of our thesis statement, we would be using those 3 predictors to plan what the focus of each of our body paragraphs is going to be. So in essence, a thesis statement with predictors helps to plan the structure of our essay. Now, there are basically 3 types of questions that we're going to have to deal with, right? And these mean to what extent do you agree, disagree, discuss both views and give your opinion, and do the advantages of this outweigh the disadvantages. These are the 3 basic types of questions that we're going to be seeing in IELTS Writing Task 2. They are not the only types of questions. There are some that are a little bit atypical but very similar in those regards, but we're going to be focusing on those 3 basic types of questions and how to deal with them. So once again, let's take a look at an actual real IELTS Writing Task 2 question. And this question says, governments should spend money on railways rather than roads. To what extent do you agree or disagree? Right? Again, there is an or, so we can 100% agree and we can 100% disagree. Right? However, for those kind of questions, right, we would need a thesis statement to predict our structure, right? And again, we would use a predictor to plan the structure of our essay. Here's an example. I believe governments should spend more money on roads rather than railroads because roads are better suited for everyday commuting, the success of small businesses, and allow for better mobility in a time of crisis. Once again, we have 3 predictors which plan the structure of our essay. But for many questions, this structure may not be enough. Okay? This is why we're going to be learning about 3 essay structures. Type B, which we're already familiar with, and again, a lot of us are familiar with the Type B method of just an introduction and 3 body paragraphs, and this works with some IELTS Writing Task 2 questions, especially the ones to what extent you agree or disagree. You can always use a Type B essay for questions that ask you to what extent you agree or disagree. But you may also need a Type A essay, which is a counter-argument essay, a 2-body paragraph essay, which you'll be surprised to know you can use to answer almost every Writing Task 2 question. And we're also going to take a look at a Type C essay, which can be very effective in some cases, some less usual cases as well. So, for example, we can see a question like this. Racial discrimination continues to be a problem in a majority of countries around the world. What are some of the causes of racial discrimination? And how can we reduce racial discrimination in our communities? Now, for this question, we're asked about the causes, right? And we're also talking about the effects. So, as we mentioned before, when we're taking a look at our task response, specifically for Band 7, we have to address all parts of the task, which are the causes and the effects, equally. So, if let's just say we wouldn't be able to use this particular type 3 body paragraph essay in order to get a band 7 at all. For example, if I just talk about causes, if I spend 2 body paragraphs about the causes, and I spend 1 paragraph about solutions, I will only get a band 6 in task achievement because I did not answer both sides of the question equally. Right? And similarly, if I spend more time on solutions rather than causes, right, we wouldn't want to try that kind of essay structure either because we're not providing a balanced response. So for those questions that ask you 2 types of questions, where the cause and effect, you may want to talk about causes in 1 body paragraph and solutions in another body paragraph. Just 2 body paragraphs of equal size, right, in order to create a balanced response. However, we might also want to use a type C question. And in a type C answer, we let's say talk about 1 cause of the problem and a solution to that cause, then another cause to the problem and a solution to that cause. We could theoretically just stay with those 2 body paragraphs, but with 250 words at least, we might include another body paragraph that addresses another cause and a solution to that 3rd cause. Okay, so as an example for a thesis statement, I could say, because racial discrimination comes from cultural homogeneity and the interests of powerful classes, diversification and loss of fear can bring about a more racially equal society. So in this particular thesis statement, we have 2 predictors that talk about causes and 2 predictors that show solutions to racial discrimination, right? So that would be a type A response, right? Two points for causes, 2 points of solutions, right? But we could also write a thesis statement such as this. In order to address the issue of racial discrimination, we need to solve the problems of unfair educational standards, misrepresentation in media, and unfair employment tactics. In this particular thesis statement, right, we're including 3 causes of racial discrimination, but we're also going to address the solutions for each. So for this particular thesis statement, this would correspond to a type C essay, in which we're describing 3 causes, but we're also going to be discussing the 3 solutions to these 3 issues. In this case, unfair educational standards, misrepresentation in media, and unfair employment tactics. So that would be a type C essay. So there's really an option for those types of questions. So whenever you see what are the causes, what are the effects, you could choose a type A or a type C essay. However, this is a very common type of question. We get these. This is probably one of the most common kinds of questions for IELTS Writing Task 2. The discuss both views and give your opinion. And in this particular question, we see some people believe that the only way to increase female participation in politics is to create laws that demand an equal number of men and women to make up legal bodies. Other believes that the best way to change the situation is education. Discuss both views and give your opinion. So as we can see in this kind of question, we're given 2 views. We don't want to just choose one view and explain why we like one more than the other, although we can mention that in our conclusion. More specifically, we need to use a type A essay. So whenever you see a question that says discuss both views and give your opinion, we are explicitly asked to write a type A essay. So in this instant, we would spend 1 body paragraph talking about how laws can help female participation in politics, and 1 body paragraph talking about how education can increase political participation of women. Right? So this would be explicitly anytime I discuss both views and give opinion, we would write a type A essay. Again, let's take a look at a thesis statement here. Although legislature may be an effective means of increasing female participation in politics, I believe education is a far more effective way of encouraging women to take interest in political participation. Again, I'm showing a preference here for the second point, but I am planning to talk about both sides equally and present a balanced response in a type A essay, writing one body paragraph about one point of view and one body paragraph about a second point of view. So just to sum up, we're going to take a look at three kinds of essays. And for all of those three types of essays, type A, B, and C, which we're going to be discussing in this module and in this part specifically, the main point is to always remember to present a balanced response, because it is essential for us in order to score that minimum, band 7, to discuss both views equally for that minimum of band 7 for task achievement. So again, remembering what a good thesis statement is, a good thesis statement is like a map that predicts the structure of the essay, right? It is our brainstorming, and our thesis statement is the introduction. It's usually just one or two sentences that plans our response, has a clear opinion about how we feel, and answers every part of the question. Okay, so looking at, we're going to take a look at some thesis statements. And as we look at these thesis statements, we're going to look at 4 examples of thesis statements. We're going to read these thesis statements and try to predict what structure of an essay those thesis statements will be predicting. So let's take a look at the first thesis statement on our list. Although developed countries do have a responsibility to assist needy people in times of economic and catastrophic crisis, long-term international financial support may lead to dependence and economic stagnation. So here we're talking about the general topic about countries having responsibility to help other countries. And in this thesis statement, we can see that we have 2 topics about, 2 predictors that show that it is important for countries to help in terms of economic and catastrophic crisis, but also there's a disadvantage here, and that is this continual support from other countries may lead to dependence and economic stagnation. And again, economic lack of change and development. So in this thesis statement, we can see that with 2 points for a positive and 2 points for a negative, when we're dealing with that particular issue, we're going to be dealing with a type A essay. We're going to be spending one part of the essay talking about the advantages, and one part of the essay, an equal part of the essay, talking about predictor 3 and 4, talking about the opposite side. So this will be a type A essay. And as we look at the rest of these thesis statements, do try to keep in mind and try to guess which structure this would be. Let's take a look at thesis statement 2. Although globalization and the ease of international travel have made the disappearance of certain languages inevitable, the preservation of distinct languages does have a certain amount of cultural and historical value. Now we can see in this thesis statement that when we're talking about languages and preservation languages, we see 2 reasons why it's an advantage to keep certain languages alive, and 2 reasons, or why they disappear, rather, 2 disadvantages of trying to keep languages alive. There are 2 advantages to keeping languages alive. So once again, if we see 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages, we are really writing a thesis statement that's going to predict a type A essay. Let's look at number 3. In order to solve today's unsustainable reliance on fossil fuels, we should encourage sustainable production methods, invest in green energy, and minimize our needs for combustion-based transportation. Now, this thesis statement is leading us towards describing 3 possible solutions to an issue, 3 possible solutions to our reliance on fossil fuels. So because we're talking about only 3 solutions and nothing else, we can see that this is 100% a type B essay because we're only talking about solutions, not causes, only solutions. So we're spending 3 body paragraphs just focusing on those 3 solutions. With thesis statement 4, if there is ever to be any hope of decreasing the rate of crime in Toronto, we should address the issues of gang-related activity, racial segregation, and educational inequality. Now again, we're talking about 3 causes of crime in Toronto. We're looking 3 causes but we're also going to be we're going to address these issues. So we're actually going to deal with these issues. So in this thesis statement, we are describing 3 problems or 3 causes of crime in Toronto, but we're also explaining explicitly that this essay is also going to provide solutions to all 3 of those problems, making this a type C essay. Okay? So in general, thesis statements provide a map for our essay. So a carefully structured thesis statement helps us to predict the structure of the essay. And again, for us, we're only going to talk about type A and B, C throughout this module. Those are the only 3 types of essays. And I would also say that the vast majority of writing task 2 essays can be discussed with a type A essay. Okay, a type A essay works really well to address most of those writing task 2 essays. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we need to create a balanced response. Okay, so it's also important to understand the question, and I think that is really the biggest issue that we have, is to understand what the questions are asking us to do. And in many cases, the questions are quite tricky, and the thesis statement approach helps us to make sure that we are in fact discussing the issue and we are in fact answering the question. Here's a very tricky question. At the present time, the population of some countries includes a relatively large number of young adults compared with the number of older people. Do the advantages of this outweigh the disadvantages? So once again, right, in order to understand this question, it's very important not to get tricked by some of the wording of this question. So it's asking us about that the population of countries includes a relatively large number of young adults compared with the number of older people. But in this question, we're not asked to compare an older population with the advantages of having a younger population. This question is simply saying that some countries have more younger people than older people. And what are the advantages, right? What are the advantages of having more younger people? And what are the disadvantages of having more younger people than older people in society? So this is an example of very commonly misunderstood question. Many candidates would talk about the advantages and disadvantages in the sense that they would talk about the advantages of having many young people and the disadvantages of having many older people. But in this particular question, we have to talk about the advantages of having many young people in a society and the disadvantages of having many young people in a society. More than that, okay, so we have to talk about that once again to have that balanced response, but we're also asked to show these advantages and disadvantages equally, right? We have to have an equal response. So once again, for this, we could be talking about the advantages of having many younger people and disadvantages of having many younger people. Or we could talk about the advantage of having many younger people and the disadvantage of the same way. An advantage in that same respect, and disadvantage regarding that particular advantage, right? So we could have a type C essay as well. But to make that question as easy as possible, I'm going to rely on type A essay. Although a proportionally younger population society increases technological and cultural innovation, it often results in loss of traditional culture and moral integrity. So for this kind of essay, we would talk about the advantages, the technological, cultural aspects of having advantages of having many young people, but also the disadvantages of having many young people and how it leads to traditional cultures being forgotten, and maybe even the moral integrity of a society that might be affected by having fewer older people in society, right? So that would be a type A essay as well. Okay? Again. Just to summarize, it's very essential for us to understand what the question is asking us. And in order to produce a balanced response, a thesis statement method is an essential means for us to brainstorm our answers and be able to produce a balanced response.